Howdy, Popcorn Junkie, singular here, reviewing a new movie by British filmmaker, Cornish filmmaker in fact, Mark Jenkin. The film's called Bait. It's set in Cornwall. To give it a quick grab, it's a film about the gentrification of Cornwall, specifically of a Cornish fishing village. It stars Edward Rowe, who plays a fisherman called Martin, and it's about the tug of war between tradition and tourism in Cornwall, the influx of those people from cities, especially London and the home counties, as they buy up the cottages of former fishermen and people who live and are indigenous to Cornwall. It's a pretty straightforward story. It's about a fisherman called Martin, as I say, played by Edward Rowe. He's a fisherman without a boat, which in itself is an existential crisis for a fisherman. He fishes by laying what looks like a sort of net of sorts on a beach and catching sort of various fish that kind of come into that. At a later point in the film, he manages to obtain a lobster pot, but only one lobster pot. So, you know, he's trying to raise the cash to get a boat. He's had to sell his former home. Him and his brother have had to sell their former home to middle-class London types who are themselves renting out the property to holidaymakers in Cornwall. But probably the most unique thing about this film, and the trailer's probably playing alongside me jabbering away about it, is the way in which it's shot. It's been shot by Mark Jenkin, who's been a short filmmaker for many years. He's made feature-length films as well. He's made this film basically using what are called wind-up or clockwork Bolex 16mm cameras, the kind of camera I used to use when I was at film school. And they're, 16mm runs through them. It's a very sort of old format, and he's even gone so far as to develop the films himself. So this lends the film a really sort of granular, grainy, film itself is a living, organic thing. It's a sort of chemical reaction, the processing of film, the projection of film, light passing through the film. It's the reaction of chemicals on celluloid and all that kind of stuff. And so, real cinephiles, people like Quentin Tarantino, they make a big deal about shooting stuff on celluloid, on film, because there's a sort of granular, grainy, it feels alive in some way. It feels like it's bubbling. And that's certainly the case with this, where, he's kind of developed it in such a way that you get all these scratches and all these lens flares and all these bits and bobs all over the lens. So he's really reminding us of the organic nature of film. It's a chemical and a light-based medium. And, Mark Jenkins is really key on that. So the style of this film hits you between the eyes. I would say that, upon first watching, I thought, God, recommending people to see this. For the first 20 minutes or so, it runs the risk of possibly feeling like it's been made in a very formulaic, slow, stilted manner. But that is the style. That is the point. He's trying, I think, to highlight certain filmmaking techniques. So the editing is an incredibly blocked style. It's very sort of rigid. It's sort of static shots. There is some camera movement, but it's limited by the technology of the Bolex camera, which is a very rudimentary piece of kit. It's like a sewing machine that you just sort of point around, or, it's a very sort of, you're not getting all sort of steady cams and all that kind of stuff. So the editing's very blocked. It sort of reminded me of the early movies of people like Russian formalists like Eisenstein. If you're not a film student, or if you're not a cinephile, if you're not a film fan, if you're not a sort of film geek, unfortunately, I think a lot of this stuff could be lost on you, because, it's an incredibly slow, it's a strangely slowly paced film. And it is quite stilted. The editing, people are sort of held in shot and they sort of talk like that and they talk like that. Once you sort of settle into it, once you sit with it for a while, you sort of relax into this very strange, sometimes jarring rhythm. Not only have you got this incredibly highly contrasting black and white, grainy, scratched up footage, you've also got a soundtrack that's actually been recorded separately and then aligned with the footage. And there's that sense of a sort of discordant, kind of slightly out of sync, slightly like it has been recorded at a different time in a different place, sort of melded together. And so all this jangly sort of old technique, camera technique, filming technique, I think works really well with the subject matter. So let's remind ourselves, it's about the loss of old ways of life, old industries, old work. It's the incoming of new money. It's the alienation of a local community. So you've got tradition looking in at sort of innovation, if you like, coming in and making them feel sort of obsolete. And in a strange way, you've got these really old filmmaking techniques looking at a really modern setting, because you'd think that it was set in the old days, but it's set now, of course. So you're getting shots of resolutely 21st century locations, cars and buildings and what have you. And yet at the same time it's being shot in this way. So the actual technicalities of this film sort of in themselves are doing the very same thing that the fisherman is doing when he looks at these gentrifiers coming in and taking up their cottages. So it's sort of like the old way looking at the new way. So it's like old eyes and old sound looking at a new world. And that for me kind of makes the style and technique of the film chain magically to the subject, and so over time it kind of enacts a sort of magic spell over you. It sort of charms you, it sort of lures you in, a little bit like a mermaid on a rock out at sea in Cornwall. It calls you in like a siren's song, and then once you're in it, you accept this rhythm, you accept this slightly stilted, formal editing technique and the way it's shot, and you start to engage with the characters. So in terms of what story there is, this fisherman Martin is he has a brother, and they've sold their house to this middle class urban family or home counties family that now rent it out. But whilst Martin himself is still trying to eke a living without a fishing boat, his brother has a very big fishing boat, but he's essentially sold out, in Martin's terms, to the tourists by taking them out on trips, half-hour trips around the bay, all that kind of stuff. So, he's got things like stag do's with guys dressed in inflatable penises and all that sort of stuff. So you've got, again, that sense of two brothers. One's gone the sort of sell-out route, but is actually making a living. The other one is trying to stay traditional, stay loyal to his sort of origins, but at the same time he's got virtually no money to show for it. The camera work at times, especially with the nautical seaside context, reminded me of films like Nanook of the North and some of those really old-fashioned films, which weren't really films, but they were moments. They'd film moments like Shackleton's adventure to the Antarctic. It has that sense of found footage. It has a sense that this was something that happened many years ago, and yet it's bang up to date. That's what I think is so clever about this film. The soundtrack, as I say, has been recorded separately, and like the moving image, like the grain and the granular flicker of the images, the soundtrack is granular too. So forgetting the dialogue, which has that strange, slightly disjointed, dislocated connection to the mouths that are speaking it, you've got natural sound. So it's the sounds of boats and car engines and seagulls and the sea, and they literally wash up, and there are crescendos and they wash back, and so you have this building, burgeoning stress, and across the film there's a distinct sense that we're building towards something terrible that's going to happen. At points I thought, oh my god, we're going to have such a scene of great violence, and I don't want to give away what actually happens at the end of this film because I think you should see it. We are building to something, but that sense of a crescendo and that sense of a build was quite artfully constructed and quite indirectly constructed in very sort of benign areas, whether it be the sound of the waves crashing, and the editing style as well, sort of at times would speed up and generate this very, it'd be very static shots, cross-cut, talking heads just talking to each other. But you would get, I was finding myself feeling increasingly uncomfortable, and increasingly there was this sense that, oh my god, something awful is going to burst at some point. The editing in this reminded me, as I say, of like Russian filmmakers like Eisenstein and Dziga Vertov. Film student stuff here, guys. But in the way he edits it, Mark Jenkins, there's a distinct reminder of how the simple laying of one shot with another shot constructs meaning. And I think this film does a good job of reminding you as a viewer that editing is a thing. Now, you could argue that editing needs to always be invisible, yeah, it does. But by reminding us of what it means to put two images alongside us, it also helps us in placing two different lifestyles alongside us in this film. So you've got the lifestyle of the gentrifiers and you've got the lifestyle of the Cornish fishermen, and that sort of sitting side by side and being contrasted against each other was also, paralleled, if you like, in the way that he edits quite boldly between shots, almost sometimes holding the shots for a beat longer than he would do normally if you're watching television or a sort of Netflix series. It's very quickly cut. The shot will sit. He's composed his shot, he's holding that shot, and then he moves to the next shot, and it focuses the mind on why he's made the join at the point that he makes the join. So he kind of makes editing a very powerful statement. A good example of this, there's a massive argument in the pub at one point, and there's an argument between, I think, the landlady and Martin the fisherman. Mark Jenkin starts to cross-cut between that argument and an argument between a girl who works in the pub and the boys playing pool. And so you're cross-cutting between four of them, and it becomes quite rhythmic, and it starts to build and it starts to build. And so that sense of conflict and that sense of something about to blow was brilliantly constructed just through the simple act of editing. This isn't picture postcard nostalgia either. This is gritty, grainy, granular magnification of the details and the simplicity of a conflict. In many ways, this film is so rugged and raw, it kind of reminded me, it's almost like, if you go and see this, the feeling I was left with when I came out of the cinema was like I'd found a relic, I'd found something washed up on a beach in Cornwall. It was like the grains that run through a really old piece of hull wood from a boat, found on the beach, where the grain has been really washed away so you can run your fingers along it. It's granular, it's grainy, it's been lived in, it's been used, it's been chopped at and chipped at and hit and washed and by the sea and by the rocks, and it just feels like it's been left just discarded there. And this film has a sense of that, it has a feeling of that in the sound, in the visuals. It's almost like, you know, what's that, synesthesia, is it, where you have different, you smell words and you see sounds and all that kind of stuff. This film does that. This is like an artifact. It's like an artifact found on a beach of an old lifestyle looking at a new lifestyle, and yet it's its own thing at the same time. I would hope and I trust that it's the kind of film that once you get past its very clearly unique approach to editing and performance. I mean, there's no two ways about it. The delivery of lines is very straight, it's very stilted. It makes you think about what's being said. It's asking you to think about the filmmaking kit and what we do when we make films. Once you've got past that, it really works a little bit like a sort of poem, I think. It works on a poetic level, it works on a very simplistic rhythmic level. I tell you what, almost like a sea shanty. It kind of has that rhythmic, roiling sort of, you know, ebb and flow of tide. There's a feeling of tides moving within it, and so you move one way and you move the other. You feel that something's gonna, you know, something awful's gonna happen, and then it ebbs away. And without giving it away, we do build to a crescendo moment, and that is like the waves crashing onto the beach and crashing onto the cliffside rocks. And so, you know, but it's a very clever film. So it works on so many non-verbal levels. It works on so many almost non-cinematic levels through its simple use of cinematic technique. Now, I don't want to sound pretentious, I don't want to sound wanky, it probably does sound wanky, but I do think this is a film made by a filmmaker who is genuinely opening up what film language is and is trying to do something very new. And I think we need more films like this. We need more films that are looking at the filmmaking apparatus, the camera, the film stock, the celluloid, the light, the soundtrack, thinking of different ways of using that to generate something in us that's not even about the film. It's about old remembered ideas of what sound is, old remembered ideas of lifestyle, old remembered ideas of what film is. And I think this film is actually quite quietly incredibly revolutionary and incredibly clever.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.